The small apartment was quiet except for the sound of crayons scratching on paper. 7-year-old Zoe sat at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration as she colored a picture of what looked like 3 stick figures. Her mom, Nina, stood at the stove, stirring pasta for dinner while sneaking glances at her daughter's artwork. "Who's in your picture, sweetie?" Nina asked, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "That's me," Zoe pointed to the smallest figure. "And that's you." Her finger moved to the tallest stick person with long hair. She hesitated before pointing to the third figure. "And that's, I don't know, just someone else." Nina's heart squeezed. That third figure had been appearing in Zoe's drawings lately. Not with any specific features, just a presence, a space Zoe seemed to know should be filled by someone. The pasta timer dinged, saving Nina from having to respond. At 32, she had mastered the balancing act that came with raising a child alone. 5 years of parent-teacher conferences attended solo. 5 years of working extra shifts at the hospital where she helped patients as a nurse. 5 years of birthday candles blown out with just the two of them, watching the small flames flicker out. After dinner and after tucking Zoe into bed with 2 bedtime stories, one more than usual because it was Friday, Nina sank onto her worn couch. The apartment was small but cozy, decorated with bright throw pillows and framed pictures of Zoe at various ages. The walls of the refrigerator were plastered with artwork and A+ spelling tests. She picked up the day's mail from the coffee table, sorting through bills and advertisements. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Jen, "Still on for coffee tomorrow while the kids are at soccer." Nina smiled and typed back a quick yes before returning to the mail. She had built a life here, a good one. It might not be what she had pictured for herself a decade ago, but it was solid, predictable, safe. The knock on the door came just as the evening news was starting. Nina frowned. It was after 8, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She peered through the peephole and froze. The man on the other side was familiar in a way that made her stomach drop, like seeing a ghost of someone you used to know. Tom. 5 years older than when he had walked out. His once clean-shaven face now had a neatly trimmed beard, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was unmistakably him. For one wild moment, Nina considered pretending she wasn't home. But she had already turned on the porch light when she heard the knock. He would know someone was inside. With a deep breath, she opened the door just enough to see him properly, but not enough to seem welcoming. "Hi," Tom said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "I know this is unexpected." "That's one word for it," Nina replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What are you doing here, Tom?" He looked down at his shoes, expensive leather that had been walked on enough to show wear, then back up at her. "I needed to see you. To talk to you. About everything." "It's been 5 years," she said flatly. 5 years without so much as a birthday card for your daughter." Tom winced at her words but didn't deny them. "I know. I have no right to be here, no right to ask anything of you." "Then why are you?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I got a job at Memorial Hospital. I'm moving back to town permanently." He handed her the envelope. "These are the contract papers, proof that I'm staying this time." Nina didn't take it. "And what does that have to do with us?" "I want to meet her," Tom said softly. "I want a chance to know my daughter." A sound from behind made Nina turn. Zoe stood in the hallway in her cloud-patterned pajamas, blinking sleepily. "Mommy? Who's that man?" Nina felt her carefully built world shift beneath her feet. All these years, she had imagined what she would say if this moment ever came. Now that it was here, all her rehearsed speeches vanished. She looked from her daughter's curious face to the man who had once been her whole world, the man who had left them both behind for a life he claimed would be more fulfilling. "Just someone I used to know, baby," she answered carefully. "Go back to bed. I'll be there in a minute to tuck you in again." As Zoe padded back to her room, Nina turned to face Tom and the impossible choice he had brought to her doorstep on this ordinary Friday night. The park buzzed with weekend activity, kids climbing on jungle gyms, dogs chasing frisbees, and parents chatting on benches. Nina sat rigidly on a wooden bench, checking her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She had chosen this spot carefully, public enough to feel safe, casual enough for Zoe to be comfortable, and near enough to the playground that her daughter could escape into fun if things got awkward. "Are we waiting for your friend?" Zoe asked, scuffing her sneaker against the dirt. "Sort of," Nana replied, trying to keep her voice light. She hadn't told Zoe the truth yet, just that they were meeting someone important. After that night when Tom showed up at their door, she had spent 3 sleepless nights weighing her options before agreeing to this meeting. One chance, she had told him over the phone. One meeting with clear rules. A familiar figure appeared on the walking path, and Nina's chest tightened. Tom carried a colorful kite under one arm and a small gift bag in his other hand. He wore jeans and a casual button-up shirt, trying too hard to look relaxed, Nina thought. "That's him," she said quietly to Zoe. "Remember I told you about meeting someone who knew us from before? That's Tom. He knew you when you were very little." Zoe looked up with curious eyes but didn't ask the question Nina feared most. Not yet. Tom approached slowly, like someone trying not to startle a wild animal. His eyes darted between Nina and Zoe, lingering on his daughter's face with a hunger that made Nina's protective instincts flare. "Hi," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Thanks for coming." Nina nodded stiffly. "This is Zoe," she said, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Zoe, this is Tom." "Hello," Zoe said shyly, half hiding behind her mother's leg. Tom crouched down to Zoe's level, careful to maintain distance. "Hey Zoe, it's really nice to meet you. I brought something I thought we might try together, if that's okay with your mom." He held up the kite, a bright dragon with a long ribboned tail. Zoe's eyes widened with interest. "I never flew a kite before." "Me neither, actually," Tom admitted with a small laugh. "But I heard there's a first time for everything." Nana caught the reference immediately. Years ago, before Zoe was born, she had mentioned wanting to teach their future children to fly kites, something her own father had taught her. The fact that Tom remembered that tiny detail from their past sent an unwelcome warmth through her chest. "Can we try it, Mom? Please?" Zoe was already eyeing the open field beyond the playground. "Sure," Nana said, rising from the bench. "But stay where I can see you." They walked together to the grassy area, an awkward trio with careful distance between the adults. Tom handed the kite to Zoe and patiently showed her how to hold the string. Their daughter's initial wariness gradually melted as Tom demonstrated how to run with the kite to catch the breeze. "Like this?" Zoe asked, taking small running steps. "Almost. Try a little faster," Tom encouraged, jogging backward to give her space. Nina watched from a few yards away, arms crossed over her chest. She had expected to feel only resentment today, but seeing Tom's nervous excitement and Zoe's growing comfort brought more complicated emotions. When the kite finally caught the wind and soared upward, Zoe's delighted shriek made both adults smile instinctively. "Mom, look, I'm doing it." "I see, honey. That's amazing." Nina called back, then caught Tom's eye. He quickly looked away, wiping at his face. Was he crying? Later, as Zoe enjoyed the ice cream Tom had bought her, Nina set her boundaries clearly. "This doesn't change everything overnight," she said quietly while Zoe was distracted by a nearby butterfly. "You've missed 5 years. That's not fixed with one nice afternoon." Tom nodded, watching Zoe with a mixture of wonder and regret. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet, just a chance to be in her life. Regular visits maybe. On your terms. And when you decide to leave again." Nina couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I won't," Tom said firmly. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I'm not the same person who left. I've done a lot of work on myself, therapy, figuring out what matters. I was running from responsibility back then, from my own fears about being a father. I was wrong, and I'll regret it forever." As they walked back to their cars, Zoe skipped ahead, clutching her new kite. "Can Tom come over sometime?" she asked innocently. "He said he could teach me to make paper airplanes that do loops." Nana met Tom's hopeful gaze over their daughter's head. The wall around her heart had tiny cracks now, not enough to let him in, but perhaps enough to let Zoe peek out. "We'll see," she said carefully, one step at a time. 3 months had passed since that first day at the park. The kitchen calendar on Nana's wall now had little stars marked on certain days, Tuesdays after school and every other Saturday. Tom's days. Today was one of those Saturdays, and Zoe had been up since dawn, outfit already picked out, backpack packed with toys she wanted to show him. "Do you think he'll like my science project?" Zoe asked, carefully placing the shoebox diorama of the solar system into a grocery bag. Nina looked up from packing Zoe's lunch. "I'm sure he will, sweetie. You worked really hard on it." The doorbell rang, and Zoe sprinted to answer it, Nina following close behind. Their routine had become familiar now, Tom arriving exactly on time, never late, never making promises he couldn't keep. Small steps that were slowly rebuilding trust. "Hey, Space Explorer," Tom greeted Zoe, spotting the project in her hands. "Is that what you were telling me about last week?" Zoe nodded eagerly. "I got an A. Ms. Chen said my Jupiter was the best in class." "I'm not surprised. You're the smartest kid I know," Tom said, then glanced at Nina with a respectful nod. "Morning. Everything okay for pickup at 4? "Actually," Nina said, surprising herself with what she was about to offer, "my shift got cancelled today. If you two wanted to come back here after the Science Museum instead of dropping her off at my mom's, I could make dinner." The words tumbled out before she could overthink them. Tom's eyebrows lifted slightly. That would be really nice, actually. It was the first time she had invited him into their home since his return. Another small crack in the wall. Later that evening, Nina heard them before she saw them, Zoe's excited chatter and Tom's deep laugh coming up the stairwell. The apartment smelled of garlic and tomatoes, her grandmother's pasta sauce recipe simmering on the stove. "Mom, the museum had a real astronaut suit we could try on." Zoe burst through the door, cheeks flushed with excitement. "And Tom knew all about the moon rocks because he read a whole book about space." "Did he now?" Nina smiled, catching Tom's eye as he followed Zoe in, carrying her backpack and project. "I may have done some homework," Tom admitted quietly. "She mentioned being into space last week, so I figured I should brush up." The simple statement hit Nina unexpectedly. This was what had been missing before: the effort, the attention to detail, the willingness to enter Zoe's world rather than expecting her to fit into his. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Zoe dominated the conversation, reenacting the planetarium show with dramatic sound effects. When she ran to her room to get something she wanted to show, the adults were left in a moment of silence. "You've done an amazing job with her," Tom said, his voice low and sincere. "She's incredible, Nina." "She is," Nina agreed, allowing herself a small smile. "I keep thinking about everything I missed," he continued, staring down at his plate. "Her first day of school, learning to read, all those little moments that make up a life." Nina had imagined this conversation so many times over the years, pictured herself listing every milestone he'd abandoned, making him feel the weight of each absence. But sitting across from him now, she found no satisfaction in his obvious pain. "You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters to her." Before Tom could respond, the doorbell rang. Nina frowned, not expecting anyone. When she opened it, she found her parents standing there, grocery bags in hand. "Surprise," her mother said cheerfully. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop off those strawberries you love and say hi to our." Her voice died as she spotted Tom at the dinner table. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Nina's father's face hardened into the expression she'd seen only a few times in her life, the day Tom left, and now, the day he sat at their dinner table as if he belonged there. "What is he doing here?" her father asked, voice dangerously quiet. "Dad, please," Nina started, but was cut off by Zoe racing back into the room. "Grandpa, Grandma," she squealed, launching herself at her grandparents. "You're just in time. Tom took me to the Space Museum and I got to touch a meteorite." Nina's mother hugged Zoe automatically, but her eyes never left Tom, who had risen from his chair, looking unsure whether to approach or retreat. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," he said with a respectful nod. "It's good to see you again." "Wish I could say the same," Nina's father muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad," Nina warned, glancing at Zoe, who was looking between the adults with growing confusion. "Is everything okay?" Zoe asked, her earlier excitement fading. Nina's mother recovered first, setting down her bags and forcing a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. We just didn't know Tom would be here, that's all." The awkward tension was broken by Tom reaching for his jacket. "I should probably get going. Let you all have family time." But you said you'd help me practice my spelling words, Zoe protested, her lower lip trembling slightly. Tom knelt down to her level. How about I help you next time? Tuesday after school, remember? As he straightened up, Nona saw something shift in his expression, determination replacing the guilt that had been his default setting since returning. He turned to her parents with calm dignity. I understand why you're angry with me, he said quietly. You have every right to be. I hurt your daughter and granddaughter in the worst way. But I'm back now, trying to do better, and Nina has been kind enough to give me a chance to be in Zoe's life. I hope someday you might find it in your hearts to give me that chance too. The room fell silent. Nina felt caught between worlds, her history with Tom, her loyalty to her parents who had helped her through her darkest days, and her growing certainty that allowing Tom back into Zoe's life had been the right decision. As the door closed behind Tom, Nina knew that the ripples of his return were only beginning to spread. The text message came at the worst possible time. Nina was halfway through her shift at the hospital when her phone buzzed. Tom's name flashed on the screen. Can we talk? Important. She frowned, typing quickly. Working till 8. Everything ok with Zoe? She's fine. At school, it's about Saturday. Saturday was supposed to be Zoe's first overnight at Tom's new apartment. They had been building up to this for months. Longer visits, dinner at his place, but coming home to sleep, careful conversations about what it would be like to have her own space at Dad's house. Zoe had helped pick out the bedding for her new room, galaxy-patterned sheets that matched her growing space obsession. Can't talk now, Nina wrote back, sliding her phone into her pocket as her supervisor walked by. Whatever Tom needed to discuss would have to wait. She had 3 more patients to check on before lunch. But the message nagged at her throughout the day. By the time she clocked out, picked up Zoe from after-school care, and got home, Nina was wound tight with worry. After getting Zoe settled with homework and a snack, she finally called Tom. What's going on? She asked without preamble. I got called into a work meeting on Saturday, Tom said, sounding genuinely regretful. It's with the hospital board. I can't reschedule it. And you're just telling me this now? 2 days before. Nina felt the familiar anger rising in her chest. Zoe has been talking about nothing else all week. She's already packed her favorite stuffed animals. I know, I just found out myself. Look, can we move it to Sunday instead? I'll pick her up first thing. That's not the point, Tom, Nina snapped, then lowered her voice as she glanced toward the kitchen where Zoe was working on her math problems. The point is that you made a commitment. To her, you promised. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. You're right, Tom finally said. I did promise her. I'll figure something out with work. No, Nina sighed, rubbing her forehead. Don't do that. Your job is important too. She trailed off, unsure how to explain that this felt too familiar. Plans changing, Zoe coming second. Hey, Tom's voice softened. This isn't like before. I'm not bailing on her. It's one meeting and I'm trying to make it work. That's what parents do, right? They juggle. Parents. The word hung between them. 6 months ago, Nina wouldn't have used that word to describe Tom. Now, despite everything, he was becoming exactly that, a parent who showed up, who tried, who cared enough to call instead of simply canceling. Sunday works, she conceded, but you need to tell her yourself. And make it special somehow to make up for the change. Already planning on it, Tom said, relief evident in his voice. Thank you, Nina. After hanging up, Nina stood in the hallway for a long moment. The conversation had left her feeling off balance. There had been no need to fight or argue. Tom had acknowledged his mistake and looked for a solution. When had things shifted between them from hostility to something like partnership? Her thoughts were interrupted by Zoe calling from the kitchen. Mom, can you check my math? I think I did it wrong. Sunday morning arrived with unexpected tension. Tom was due at 9, but by 8:30, Zoe had already changed her outfit twice and was rearranging the items in her overnight bag for the 3rd time. What if he doesn't like having me there? She asked suddenly, looking up at Nina with worried eyes. What if I do something wrong? Nina sat beside her daughter on the bed. Honey, your dad is so excited to have you stay over. He's been getting ready for weeks. He even called me to ask what kind of cereal you like for breakfast. Really? Zoe's face brightened slightly. Really? And you know what? It's okay to feel nervous. I bet he's feeling nervous too. Nina smoothed Zoe's hair back from her forehead. New things are always a little scary at first. When the doorbell rang, Zoe grabbed her bag and headed for the door, but Nina noticed her steps were less bouncy than usual. Tom stood in the hallway, hair still damp from a shower, holding a small gift bag. "Hey, Space Cadet," he greeted Zoe with their now familiar nickname. "Ready for mission sleepover?" Zoe nodded but clung to Nina's side. Tom glanced at Nina, confusion in his eyes. "Pre-launch jitters," Nina explained quietly. Understanding dawned on Tom's face. He crouched down to Zoe's level. "You know, when astronauts go on a mission, they get nervous too, even the bravest ones." "They do?" Zoe asked. "Absolutely, but you know what helps? Having a mission buddy." He reached into the gift bag and pulled out 2 identical plush stars with smiling faces. "This one's for your room at my place," he said, handing her 1 star. "And this one's for your room here with Mom. That way, even when you're at one place, part of you is still at the other." Nina felt a lump form in her throat as she watched their daughter clutch the star to her chest. It was such a simple thing, but so thoughtful, acknowledging Zoe's emotional connection to both homes. And, Tom added, "If you get homesick or miss your mom, we can video call her anytime, no matter what. Deal?" "Deal," Zoe agreed, her smile returning. As they headed toward the door, Tom turned back to Nina. "I'll text you when we get to my place and before bedtime." Nina nodded, grateful for his understanding without having to explain her own nervousness. This would be her first night away from Zoe since Tom had returned. "Have fun, you too," she said, leaning down to kiss Zoe goodbye. "Love you to the moon and back. And to all the planets too," Zoe added, their familiar saying bringing comfort to them both. As their footsteps faded down the hallway, Nina stood in the suddenly quiet apartment. She looked at the empty space where Zoe's backpack usually sat by the door and felt a complicated mix of emotions wash over her: worry, hope, and something unexpected. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were finally getting this right. The steady beeping of hospital machines filled the pediatric ward as Nina checked on her youngest patient. 4-year-old Mia had been admitted with a severe case of strep throat that had developed into scarlet fever. For 2 days, her fever had refused to break despite medication. "How's she doing?" Dr. Rivera asked, joining Nina at the nurse's station. "Still fighting," Nina replied, updating the chart. "Parents are worried sick. Mom hasn't left the room since they brought her in." The doctor nodded sympathetically. "Let's adjust her antibiotics and make sure the parents get some rest too. They won't help their daughter by making themselves sick." Nina knew that advice all too well. When Zoe had come down with pneumonia at age 3, Nina had stayed awake for nearly 48 hours straight, terrified to close her eyes in case her daughter needed her. Back then, there had been no one to spell her, no partner to say, "Get some sleep, I'll watch her." Just Nina, a mountain of medical bills, and the bone-deep fear of being the only one responsible for this tiny human's well-being. Her shift ended at midnight, and she was gathering her things when her phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen. "Everything okay?" she answered, immediately alert. It was unusual for him to call this late. "It's Zoe," Tom said, his voice tight with worry. She woke up burning with fever. 102.5. She's complaining her throat hurts too much to swallow. Nina's nurse instincts kicked in. "Did you give her children's Tylenol?" "Yes, about an hour ago. It hasn't helped much. She's miserable, Nina. Should I take her to the ER?" Nina hesitated. The emergency room on a Friday night would be packed, meaning hours of waiting with a sick child. But if Zoe couldn't swallow... "I'm just finishing my shift. Give me 20 minutes to get to your place, and I'll check her first." "Thank you." Tom breathed, relief evident in his voice. Tom's apartment was only a 10-minute drive from the hospital. He opened the door before she could knock, hair disheveled, worry etched across his face. This was a side of Tom she'd never seen before, the panic of a parent with a seriously ill child. "She's in her room," he said, leading the way. "Her fever spiked again after I called you." Zoe lay curled on her galaxy sheets, cheeks flushed red against pale skin. Her eyes fluttered open when Nina sat on the edge of the bed. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hey, sweetie." I hear you're not feeling too good, Nina said gently, placing a cool hand on her daughter's forehead. The heat radiating from her skin was alarming. Nina pulled out the small medical kit she always carried and took Zoe's temperature. 103.2. She looked in her throat with a small penlight, angry red with white patches. Her mind flashed to little Mia in the hospital. We need to get her strep tested, Nina said, turning to Tom. With all the cases I've seen at work lately. I'll get my keys, Tom said immediately. Wait. Nina bit her lip, making a quick decision. The urgent care will be just as crowded as the ER. I have rapid strep tests at my place from when the school had that outbreak last month. She stroked Zoe's hot cheek. It might be faster to take her there. Together, they'd bundled Zoe in blankets. Tom carried her to Nina's car, their daughter's head lolling against his shoulder, too weak to hold herself up. As Nina drove, Tom sat in the back with Zoe, wetting her lips with a damp cloth when she whimpered about her throat. At Nina's apartment, they worked as a team, Tom holding Zoe upright while Nina performed the strep test, then preparing an ice pack while Nina called her pediatrician friend for advice when the test showed positive. Dr. Chen says we need to start antibiotics right away, Nina said, hanging up. She's calling in a prescription to the 24-hour pharmacy. Tom nodded. I'll go get it. No, Nina touched his arm. You stay with her. You're better at getting her to take medicine than I am, honestly. I've seen how you make a game of it. The admission came easily, surprising her. I'll be faster at the pharmacy anyway. I know all the night staff. When she returned with the medication, she found Tom sitting on the couch, Zoe asleep on his chest. He'd set up a humidifier nearby and had a digital thermometer in one hand, monitoring her temperature. Rainbow-colored streamers hung from the ceiling fan. Balloons bobbed against the walls. The small apartment had transformed into a celebration zone with handmade Happy Birthday Zoe signs taped to nearly every surface. Do you think we have enough balloons? Nina asked, standing back to survey their work. She blew a stray hair from her face, hands on her hips. Definitely not, Tom replied with a straight face. 8 balloons per year of life is the minimum requirement for a proper birthday. I read that somewhere. Nina laughed, shaking her head. So we need 64 balloons for this tiny apartment. I don't make the rules, Tom shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he tacked another streamer to the wall. Planning Zoe's 8th birthday party together had seemed like a natural next step after the night they'd spent caring for her during her illness. What Nina hadn't expected was how much she would enjoy it. The back and forth of ideas, Tom's surprisingly creative suggestions, the shared excitement of creating a special day for their daughter. Nina checked her watch. The cake should be ready for pickup in an hour, and your mom called this morning to confirm she's coming. Tom paused in his decorating. How do you feel about that? Her coming? Nina considered the question. Tom's mother, Diane, had reached out shortly after Tom's return, asking hesitantly if she might be allowed to see her granddaughter again. The initial meeting had been awkward. Diane tearful and apologetic for losing touch, Zoe shy but curious about this grandmother who sent her space books and called her Little Star. It's good for Zoe, Nina said finally. She should know her grandmother. She didn't add the rest, that unlike Tom, Diane had sent birthday cards every year, even when they went unanswered. That the older woman had respected Nina's boundaries while never giving up hope of reconnection. Tom nodded, seeming to understand the unspoken parts. My dad asked if he could come too. I told him not yet. Too many new people at once might overwhelm her. That was thoughtful, Nina said, surprised by his consideration. The Tom she had known before would have pushed for everything at once, impatient with incremental steps. A key turned in the lock, Nina's parents bringing Zoe home from their morning together. The door burst open, and Zoe bounded in, stopping short at the sight of the decorations. Wow, she gasped, eyes wide. This is amazing. Nina's father followed, carrying shopping bags. His eyes found Tom immediately, and Nina held her breath. Their relationship remained frosty, despite months of Tom proving his commitment. Her father still remembered every tear Nina had shed, every struggle she'd faced alone. Looking good in here, he said gruffly, not quite making eye contact with Tom. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either, progress of a sort. Thanks for taking her shopping, Nina said, hugging her parents. Did you find a dress? 2. Zoe announced, pulling items from the bags. Grandma said I needed options. She held up a sparkly blue dress, then a green one with planets embroidered on the collar. Which one should I wear today? The birthday girl decides, Tom said, helping her hold both dresses up to examine them. Nina's mother moved to the kitchen, unpacking more bags. We brought some extra snacks for the party, and I made those dumplings Zoe loves. Mom, you didn't have to, Nina began. Of course I did. It's my granddaughter's birthday. Her tone left no room for argument. Tom, come help me arrange these on platters. Nina watched in amazement as her mother directed Tom around the kitchen, showing him how to arrange the dumplings just so. A month ago, her mother would barely speak to him. Now, though still formal, she was making an effort. All because of how Tom had stayed by Zoe's side through her illness, proving himself capable of being a real parent. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was filled with people. Zoe's friends from school ran around, high on cake and excitement. Parents chatted in small groups, some curious about Tom's presence, others already familiar with the complicated family situation. Zoe stood in the center of it all in her planet dress, demonstrating how the solar system model from Tom spun and lit up, a chorus of cool rising from her friends. She's having the time of her life, Diane said, appearing beside Nina with 2 cups of punch. Thank you for this, for letting me be here. Nina accepted the drink with a small smile. She needs all the people who love her. Across the room, Nina caught sight of Tom deep in conversation with her father. They stood awkwardly by the snack table, her father gesturing with a half-eaten dumpling. Neither looked comfortable, but neither had walked away either. What do you think they're talking about? Diane wondered, following Nina's gaze. Probably fishing, Nina replied, or baseball, safe topics. But as she watched, she saw her father's expression shift from stiff politeness to something more genuine. Tom said something that made the older man nod slowly, thoughtfully. Whatever barrier had stood between them seemed to thin just slightly. Later, as guests began to leave, Nina found herself beside Tom in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. So he said, rinsing a plate, I had an interesting talk with your dad. I saw that, Nina admitted, fishing tips. Tom laughed softly. Not exactly. He wanted to know my long-term plans. For Zoe. He hesitated, everything. Nina's hands still on the cups she was gathering. Oh? And what did you tell him? The truth. That I'm committed to being Zoe's father for the rest of my life. That I'm grateful for every minute I get to spend with her. Tom passed her another rinsed plate. And that I hope someday all of us, you, me, your parents, my parents, might find a way to be a real family again. Different than before, but still family. Nina felt something catch in her chest, not quite fear, not quite hope, but a flutter of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Before she could respond, Zoe appeared in the doorway, face smeared with chocolate despite their best efforts. Can we open my presents now? The ones from you guys? She bounced on her toes, the sugar clearly still in effect. One more minute, birthday queen, Nina said, wiping her hands on a towel. Go make sure everyone's in the living room. As Zoe skipped away, Nina turned back to Tom. What did my dad say to all that? Tom's smile was small but genuine. He said if I hurt either of you again, they'd never find my body. Nina couldn't help but laugh. That sounds like him. And then, Tom added more softly, he said he's starting to believe I might be worthy of a second chance. Not there yet, but starting to. They looked at each other, surrounded by the evidence of the day they'd created together. Dirty dishes, balloon strings, the sound of family chatting in the next room. Somewhere in the chaos of the past 8 months, something had healed between them, not back to what it was, but into something new and unexpected. We should get back to the party, Nina said, not quite ready to put words to the feelings stirring beneath the surface. Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. Lead the way. A year had passed since Tom's unexpected return. Seasons had changed, routines had formed, and life had settled into a new normal that none of them could have imagined 12 months earlier. Nina sat on a blanket spread across the grass, watching as Tom helped Zoe adjust her telescope in the fading evening light. The community park was hosting a stargazing event, and Zoe had been talking about it for weeks. Other families dotted the hillside around them, all faces turned upward as darkness slowly claimed the sky. "Is it working yet?" she called out, smiling at her daughter's focused expression. "Almost," Zoe replied without looking up. "Dad says we need to wait until it's a little darker to see Jupiter's moons." "Dad." The word still caused a small ripple in Nina's chest whenever Zoe used it. Not pain anymore, just acknowledgement of how far they'd come. "Hot chocolate." Tom's mother appeared beside Nina, offering a thermos cup. In the past year, Diane had become a regular presence in their lives: Sunday dinners, school events, occasional babysitting when both Nina and Tom had work commitments. "Thanks," Nina said, accepting the warm drink gratefully. The spring evening had grown chilly as the sun disappeared. Diane settled onto the blanket beside her. "I was just thinking about last year's stargazing night. Remember how nervous Zoe was about looking through the big telescope?" Nina nodded, smiling at the memory. "And now she's practically running the show, telling everyone about constellations." They watched in comfortable silence as Tom knelt beside their daughter, pointing at something in the viewfinder. Zoe's excited gasp carried across the darkening field. "He's good with her," Diane said softly. "Better than I ever expected he could be." "He's learned a lot," Nina agreed. "We both have." The first stars appeared overhead, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. More would follow as true darkness fell, revealing the vast space above that had so captured Zoe's imagination. Nina found herself thinking about space too, not the cosmic kind, but the emotional space that had existed between her and Tom. How it had gradually filled with new moments, new understandings, new versions of themselves. "They found it," Diane exclaimed as Zoe jumped up and down beside the telescope, waving excitedly for Nina to join them. Nina made her way across the grass, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening breeze. Zoe's face was alive with wonder as she stepped back from the telescope. "Mom, you have to see. It's Jupiter, and you can actually see the moons around it. They're like tiny dots, but they're real." Nina bent to look through the eyepiece. A bright orb surrounded by pinpoints of light came into focus, distant worlds captured in a small circle of glass. "That's amazing, honey. Dad said someday we might be able to go on a vacation to see a real observatory. With giant telescopes bigger than our whole apartment." Zoe's eyes shone brighter than any star. "Can we?" "Someday." Nina glanced at Tom, who looked slightly embarrassed. "I might have gotten carried away with future plans," he admitted. "It just came up when we were reading about observatories last week." "I think that sounds like an amazing idea," Nina said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "Maybe next summer?" Zoe's delighted squeal drew smiles from nearby families. She darted off to tell her grandmother about the potential trip, leaving Nina and Tom standing beside the telescope. "You don't have to agree to that," Tom said quietly. "I shouldn't have mentioned it without talking to you first." Nina shook her head. "It's okay. Actually, it's good that you're thinking about the future, making plans. She needs that security." The unspoken part hummed between them, that for 5 years, Zoe hadn't had the luxury of a future with her father in it. That each plan Tom made and kept was another small brick in the foundation of trust they were rebuilding. First star. Someone called from across the field, and a hush fell over the gathered families as more stars appeared, one by one, until the sky was scattered with light. Tom adjusted the telescope slightly. "The International Space Station should be visible in about 20 minutes. Want to help me find it?" The casual question held no pressure, no expectation, just an invitation to share a moment. "Sure," Nina replied. "I've never seen it before." They stood side by side, faces tilted upward, shoulders almost touching. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that had once seemed impossible. "You know," Tom said eventually, voiced low enough that only she could hear, "a year ago today was when I showed up at your door." Nina hadn't realized the date, but he was right. 1 full circle around the sun since that rainy evening when everything had changed. A lot's happened since then. Tom nodded, his profile visible in the faint glow from the telescope's control panel. "I think about that night all the time. How scared I was that you wouldn't even open the door. How I'd rehearsed what to say 100 times and still got it all wrong." It wasn't wrong, Nina said, surprising herself. It was honest. That's why I listened. From across the field, Zoe's laugh rang out as she showed another child how to use a star chart. Her confidence, her joy, these were new developments too, blossoming in the steady presence of both her parents. I never thanked you, Tom said suddenly. For what? For giving me the chance to know her, to be her dad. His voice caught slightly, even when I didn't deserve it. Nana thought about all the anger she'd carried for so long, the walls she'd built to protect herself and Zoe. How those walls had slowly transformed, not crumbling exactly, but opening, creating space for something new to grow. Everyone deserves a second chance, Tom, she said softly. Even you, even me. He turned to look at her then, question in his eyes. You. Nina smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. I wasn't perfect either. I was so hurt that I almost kept Zoe from having a relationship with you when you came back. I was protecting her, but also punishing you. You had every right. Maybe. But that wouldn't have been what was best for her. Nina looked across the field to where their daughter stood, pointing excitedly at the sky. Look at her now. She needs both of us. In the darkness, Tom's hand found hers, a gentle touch that asked permission. Nina hesitated only briefly before intertwining her fingers with his. Not a romantic gesture, not yet, but an acknowledgement of the journey they'd shared. Look, Zoe shouted from nearby, pointing upward. A shooting star. A streak of light cut across the night sky, there and gone in a heartbeat, leaving an impression on the darkness. Make a wish, someone called out. Nana closed her eyes briefly, not wishing for anything specific, just feeling gratitude for this moment, this park, this night, this strange and broken and healing family they had become. When she opened her eyes, she found Tom watching her, his expression open and wondering. What did you wish for? He asked softly. Nina squeezed his hand gently. Nothing we don't already have. Above them, the stars continued their ancient patterns, unchanging yet always in motion. Below, on a blanket on a hillside, a family that had once been lost found its way back to each other, different than before, shaped by absence and return, but stronger in the places that had been broken and carefully, lovingly repaired.